Coffee.
Well, if no one's gonna drink this, maybe I'll just... Ugh, that's terrible. That's...
Good morning. This is Morning Coffee with the Chief, and I am your host, Patrick Jordan, former law enforcement, 38 years in law enforcement, also the son of a police officer. So law enforcement's been a big part of my life for my whole life. And on this show, we go over law enforcement or crime-related movies. We talk about the movie, our own experiences, and maybe some stuff that's going on today. Now, this movie, Sicario, we're going to do the movie Sicario, which is about Mexican drug cartels. But before I introduce the movie and my guests, I really want to talk about the Los Angeles Mission. I am on the foundation board for the Los Angeles Mission. The Los Angeles Mission services the homeless of Skid Row. That's in downtown Los Angeles. Very dense population of homeless people live on Skid Row and are serviced by the LA Mission and other entities. The LA Mission has been in place for 85 years, and they really do two things. They meet the basic needs of those who are homeless and insist on staying on the streets by offering them an occasional bed, if they want to get off the streets for a night, a shower, some food. In fact, they serve over 400,000 meals a year. They also give them some basic medical services if it's needed. And if they are ready to get off the streets, they have wraparound services that go anywhere from 6 to 12 months. And they give them job placement opportunities. They treat them for their mental health issues, their addiction issues. And it really is a great program. And the goal is to integrate those who've decided to get off the street back into society in a positive way. I'm encouraging you guys, because they do not get any government funding because they're faith-based, to make a donation to the Los Angeles Mission. Just go to their website, losangelesmission.org, and drop $25, $50, even $100 if you can afford it, and help somebody in need. Now, this show, before I get into my my movie Sicario, let me start bringing our guests on board. So the first guest is a retired chief and retired commander from Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, and that is Ralph Ornelas. Ralph did over 30 years in law enforcement. I think maybe even 40 years. He can clarify that. And Ralph is originally from New York, so you'll hear a little bit of an accent there, which is great. He's a great guy. I worked with him at least on one occasion, and he went on to be the chief of police of Westminster, which is a city in Orange County, California. Hey, Ralph, good morning and welcome to my show.
Well, good morning, Pat. It's great seeing your face again and hearing your voice. And yes, you're right. Grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and then joined the Sheriff's Department in 1979. Yeah, I did over about 40 years in law enforcement. As you, my father and a lot of the family were in law enforcement also.
Well, Ralph, I want to talk a little bit about career, but I want to thank Christian De Lorma for the $10 super chat. Let's see, a question for you, Chief. Why do you think former military gravitated to law enforcement? Well, I think people are comfortable with the kind of military, the rigid rank structures. And, in law enforcement, you do get a chance to help people. I mean, if you listen to the show, you'll hear me talk about my own experiences where I'm proudest, not necessarily the people I arrested, but the people I helped. And I think law enforcement gives you the opportunity. So, Ralph, we're going to do this movie Sicario. Before I introduce the movie, I did want to clarify, you were the captain of narcotics. Is that correct?
That's correct. I was 2.5 years at the Narcotics Bureau, and then I was moved to Men's Central Jail, which was a very interesting experience.
And you also were over at Major Crimes, which is one of our elite investigative units as well. Is that correct?
No, I was not. But I was when I was lieutenant in OSS for 9.5 years. I worked about 8 years on and off, working in Central America, Mexico, and then headed up with a great team of LA County Sheriff's OSS investigators. The murder of Jerry Ortiz, what happened June 24th, 2005. We did a federal investigation which linked that gang to Mexican mafia and also cartels.
Well, I was slightly aware of that, so I'm glad you clarified, and which is one of the reasons why I wanted you on this show for Sicario. But let's bring on our next guest, and that is retired investigator Tanya Owens. Tanya did over 30 years in law enforcement. She has also taken up a little bit of podcasting as she's a guest host on iDetective, one of my favorite shows on KGR Radio. I've been a guest on there as well, and iDetective is every Wednesday at 3 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. You can catch Tanya there. But Tanya has also been a strong advocate for from victims. Unfortunately, she was thrust into that role after the death of her husband, Sergeant Steve Owen. But she has taken it on like a trooper, and she speaks for the victims against some of these crazy Soros DAs that exist. But Tanya also has a great background because she was on our arson explosive team, and we're going to talk about that during the movie. Hey, welcome, Tanya. Good morning.
Good morning, Chief. How are you?
I'm doing great. This is show number 8, and so far everything's going good. It feels like fun and not like work, so I think I'll keep doing it.
Outstanding. Good morning, Ralph.
Hey, good morning, Tanya. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Okay, well, let's. I guess I should introduce the show, and then I'll get into talking about some scenes. Since you guys have been on the show, what I do is we used to be able to show clips of the movies, and they YouTube shot us down on that. So now I just talk about the scenes, and we might put some pictures flashing in the background, and then I'll ask you questions about the scene. But this movie was released in 2015. The name of the movie is Sicario, and that's Spanish for hitman. And it's an American action thriller. It was directed by Dennis Villanueva, and it stars Emily Blunt, Benicio del Toro. Did I get that right?
Yeah,
Martin?
Benicio del Toro.
And Josh Brolin. I was worried about getting his name right. And it really does talk about Mexican drug cartels and what they're dealing with in Mexico and south of the border, but also, that has creeped into the United States and that we're dealing with it here. And so, Rob, what'd you think of the movie? Did you enjoy the movie?
I loved the movie. It was very, very realistic. I know a lot of people got shock and awe, especially people who were not in the law enforcement field like we are. I had neighbors that saw it, came and sitting in front of my house with a cigar, and we discussed it, and they didn't believe that some of that stuff, could take place, which I said, yeah, it does. And I was telling Tanya yesterday, I saw some of the scenes with bodies hanging from the freeway overpasses when I was working down in Mexico. And it's really, truly, frightening that people would have no value of life, to do something like that to another human being. So, I mean, I enjoyed it a lot. I mean, there's some things are embellished, but pretty much it was pretty, some of the things they did was pretty much spot on. I think the interesting part is, using the CIA as extraditional killings, and I'm not sure about that. I never worked with the CIA.
Yeah, Tanya, what do you think? Did you enjoy the movie?
You know what? It's the second time I've watched it, and I loved it just as much as I did the first time. And I agree with Ralph. There's some of that stuff is very shocking to a lot of people because, I come from a third world country, El Salvador, and there is no value for life. You're absolutely right. And they have no qualm about just leaving bodies out there, just displaying them. It's honestly, and it's so sad that it's normal for the people down there. It's normal.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I mean, and it is bleeding into the United States to some degree, and we'll talk a little bit about that. One of the controversies from the movie came out was the mayor of Juarez was a little angry at how his city was portrayed, but given that, I mean, if you do
Well,
just a little bit of research, you see that a lot of the stuff that was in the
well,
movie is true. And, and the thing, no matter what the movie is, there's a theme in a lot of cop movies. And my very first movie I did was Dirty Harry, the first one from 1971 with Harry Callahan and Clint Eastwood. And there's this big theme in the movies that is very entertaining for folks, and it's called "The ends justify the means," right? And so you see that a lot in this movie. Well, look at all this going on. We're going to send in the CIA, and that used to be part of our national culture. I mean, that's we tried to overturn Castro in Cuba, and we did it in Guatemala. So that it's not far-fetched to say that we wouldn't use the CIA or some other assets to get our way in South America. Let's see. We got Christian says that one of his favorite actors is Benicio del Toro. Yeah, I think he did a great job here. In fact, he got a lot of accolades for his brooding kind of role in this one here. But yeah, that ends justify the means. Always makes it a little more entertaining, but it also puts real cops in a bad spot because we don't really get to act that way, right? So
right.
there are rules for a reason. We enforce those rules and those laws, and only the people at the very top get to order things like that. But now that people are held accountable, you just don't see that kind of aggressive behavior by the U.S. and intelligence agency. Although I'm not going to say 100% it doesn't happen. I just say I don't believe the type of things that happened in this movie did happen. But we do have U.S. assets down there. So Ralph, you were down there, and we remember the case of Kiki Camarena.
Yeah, 1985.
I think our audience probably doesn't know about that. You want to talk a little bit about that, and then we'll move on to more stuff about the show.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you watch the show Narcos, it talked about, Michael Pena portrayed Kiki, and he was digging deep, and he got into the cartels, and he set a meeting up, and then they tortured him, killed him. And I got to tell you, reflecting back in 1985, I was still at Carson Sheriff Station. I've been reading quite a bit about it, though, during that time. In my memory, we did send a lot of assets down and make an example of what you cannot do to a United States agent, DEA, FBI, or whatever. And I'll be honest with you, it's probably just like Tanya, who lost a husband, and you, Pat, who knows a lot of people. I was very proud of our country that we went down there and truly made an example of what you don't do to an agent that represents the United States of America. And you look back with Pablo Escobar, our country was very much involved, down in Colombia also. So, you reflect back into this movie, some of the examples, what we did in Colombia, that really, I don't know if we're going to do the same thing in Mexico presently today.
Yeah. So we will take action that sometimes gets right on that moral line and that legal line, as we did with Kiki Camarena, because I think we kind of bribed some folks to just push him over the board, one of the suspects over the border. But it's in highly unusual cases, and I think we probably need to start the show here. Let's go to the FBI raid, Martine.
Okay.
So the scene opens up with Emily Blunt as she's part of the hostage rescue team, and I think they believe they're going to be rescuing hostages in this house, and they got armed suspects, and of course they make entry, and they end up shooting some of the bad guys, and they quickly realize that this place, the only thing they seem to be storing there is a lot of dead bodies, right? So they have, I forget how many people they said they had there, but it was at least
42
dozen.
bodies.
42 bodies. So, and I wanted to ask a little bit, because there's also, as the scene goes on, there's an explosion, right? And so the fact that they would kill 42 bodies is not unusual. We've seen mass killings just south of the border in Mexico of immigrants or people that the cartels feels is a threat. So killing 42 bodies and storing them in a house is probably not out of the realm of possibility for Mexican drug cartels. What do you think about that, Ralph?
Well, I think it's real. That scene is pretty realistic, and the bodies. I mean, you look at, I can't remember what state it was. Tamaulipas, I think, in Mexico, where they found at least almost equivalent to the 42 bodies, but also bodies in barrels of acid. I mean, which they couldn't even define how many bodies were really actually in those barrels. So I think I that scene was very realistic to me in the sense of way they approached it, and the manner of they must have did an assessment. I mean, weaponry and stuff. So I really enjoyed the acting in that, and Emily Blunt did a great job.
Yeah.
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 So, for me, if you're dealing with that type of a level of criminal, you'd need an EOD team or a bomb squad as part of your stack with your SWAT guys, right? So I'm thinking that already. And as they're approaching this house, I see that it's got the high ground, right?
Yeah.
It's got the high ground. They can see us coming from quite a ways. And not only that, but behind them, there's a mountain, so that there could be another team up there or cameras or something where they can actually watch this house from a different location. So those are the kind of things that go through my head. But it was interesting that with our department, with the sheriff's department, a few years ago, one of our captains did something incredible, and that was to bring SWAT and the bomb squad together to work as a team. And part of that training was to send us to SWAT school, not to be a SWAT operator. We knew we had a clear line of bomb squad versus a SWAT operator. So that was incredible. But the purpose of us going through that SWAT school was to learn, how our SWAT guys work, how they stack up, how they enter a building, and how to work with them, and how to be part of that stack should they come across some IED or something at a location. And we're ready there. We're part of the stack, and all they have to do is cover us, and then we go up and deal with the device. And either we tell them, okay, go right in.
Let me clarify for our audience that Tanya was part of our arson explosive team, which is our version of the bomb squad. And I do want to ask you that because historically, dope dealers do booby trap stuff. I mean, I remember it mostly with the meth dealers before it switched to Mexico doing meth. It was the bikers and tended to do a lot of that stuff. And I remember when they merged, they didn't necessarily merge the bomb squad with SWAT guys, but they house them in the same location so they can integrate when necessary and possible. So at this point, the FBI should have been aware. But see, if they're a hostage rescue team, they're probably thinking saving hostages, not thinking booby traps for narcotics, right? But that is real, that you have explosives found at the scene or at locations where they're either storing dope or they're storing money by cartels, right?
And see, for me, as a bomb gal, once they found those bodies within the walls, it was time to retreat and a team in there to clear the building. Absolutely.
Yeah. Obviously they have to dramatize it, and people got to get hurt because we got to go on a revenge tour to go after SICARIO, because that's really what inspired the rest of the actions here was the explosion and these murders on U.S. soil. And theoretically, in the movie, they've decided they're going to go after this violent cartel boss, the Jefe de Cartel, right? So, so let's go to the. So after this event happens, and there's something I did want to talk about, and Ralph touched on it, and that is explosions were part of our at least the Colombian cartels MO in Colombia. I mean, they blew up the Supreme Court. They blew up a lot of stuff. It was their go-to tool to intimidate the public. So this is not unusual, right, Ralph?
No, it's not. And Tanya is an investigator, and I had a lot of investigators working with me with OSS. And one of the things, prior to that rescue mission that FBI did, I mean, I know Tanya would have, and also OSS and homicide and major crimes. I mean, we would have had, first of all, to get to that location, we would have had informants, and we probably would have been paying quite a good amount of money to get really timely, to make it realistic for everybody we're talking here on this podcast. Pat and Tanya knows this. We would pay informants to make sure we knew exactly what we were going into, the layout of the place, if they're using bombs for booby traps. I mean, we would probably know that. I mean, obviously we're talking about the movie, but you and I all on the screen here, we want to talk about reality and the due diligence of comprehensive investigators of what we're going to do. I mean, some of the OSS investigators I work with were just phenomenal. That we paid informants off. Even when I was a captain of narco, we paid big money to make sure we had timely intel before we put out people. And you and I, Pat, as risk management people,
Yeah,
we want to make sure that's in place because we don't want to put out people in jeopardy of not having all that timely intel.
yeah. Just the way this rolled, just for folks, a lot of the major municipality police departments and sheriff's department, they're going to have some kind of risk assessment tool. They're going to look at the threat, and they're going to develop a plan to hopefully prevent the kind of explosion that happened here, where multiple people were injured and were killed. But again, that doesn't make for a good movie. We got to have dead people so we can go on this revenge tour here, right? And we can do these extrajudicial things, and the ends justify the means, which kind of brings up our next scene. It's dramatically overreact. And so after this event happens, the U.S. decides they're going to put a team together, and it's really not clear right away who's who in this room, but it becomes clear later that it's going to be the FBI. They need the FBI, which was interesting. They need the FBI so they can operate freely in the United States. So they have to have an open case, because there is a rule: the CIA can't operate in the U.S. without some legitimate reason, unless it's part of a task force, I guess is what they imply here. So it is the CIA and others coming together to take it to this particular cartel, and I think disrupt the cartels. And I kind of wanted to get in this to you, Ralph. I mean, so in this scene, they're just interviewing, they're talking what they're going to do, and they're going to interview Emily Blunt to see if she's the agent that they want. They don't want her partner who's a lawyer, so we don't need any lawyers on this trip, right? So I thought that was pretty interesting. We don't want anybody dotting I's and crossing T's and telling us what we can and can't do, right? And so they don't want them, and he basically says our goal is to dramatically overreact, which says that we know exactly what to do. So when I saw the scene and I watched the rest of the movie and watched what happened, I couldn't help think of President Calderon, and he brought the military in to go after what were the traditional cartels in Mexico, right? So you had the Sinaloa, you had the Leyva, Beltran. I can't remember all of them, but they were pretty much set, and they'd been in place for a long time. A lot of these cartels. And then Calderon, no doubt, under pressure from the United States, no doubt with the help of U.S. intelligence and the DEA, took these guys on for 6 years when he was the president. I think it was Felipe Calderon is his name.
Mm-hmm.
And that caused a splintering of these cartels and an increase in violence. Do you kind of agree with that assessment? That's what I saw here. We're going to go in there, we're going to go after these guys, and that would actually probably just make a lot more disruption and a lot more violence. What do you think?
I believe you're on the right track what you stated there, and then what happened was all these different the Los Zetas, Sinaloa, Arellano Felix, they started battling over the plazas. The plazas are the routes of bringing the cocaine and the drugs route and stuff. So there was a war within a war, the war of the government against the cartels, and the war between the cartels, the five of them, just like the Italian mafia, the heads of the five families, they're trying to battle who's going to have the control of the plazas, not only all the way from Colombia, but to Central America, and then all the way into Mexico and into the United States. So, yeah, Pat, I mean, you're on track there.
Hey, Martine, can you go ahead and bring up the flow of fentanyl? Because I really want to link what's going on today with what's going on in the movie with cocaine, because and I just want to show the flow chart. Do you have it? There we go. So if you guys can see this, this is I pulled this off some congressional testimony. Our great friend John Sullivan submitted this, and I thought this was a great flow chart that shows what's going on with fentanyl. And you have transnational criminal organizations both in China and India that are sending either completed fentanyl or precursors of fentanyl to Canada, mostly Mexico, and then or directly to the United States, and then it's flowing into the United States. And most of it's probably going to Mexico where it's getting manufactured. At least that's what the DEA intelligence stuff says. And then it goes in the United States. And of course, we had, over in 2021, we had 70,000 people die of overdoses for fentanyl. Another 30,000 from its evil sibling, methamphetamine. You can take that down, Martine. So what we're talking about, Ralph, is these smuggling routes have existed for a long time. They see the value in the Mexican smuggling routes, even as they are today, where they're broken up, and you have the Zetas and some of these other folks that have risen. What is it? The new generation, the Jalisco new generation.
Yes, yes.
And Sonora. I think those, not Sonora. I think it's Sinaloa and the new generation are the ones that are pushing the fentanyl the heaviest. And again, so here we are. We have this drugs. We have open borders. We have this drug flowing, and Americans, U.S. citizens, are paying with their lives. They paid with their lives when it was crack cocaine, or cocaine, with either doing drug battles or overdoses or a life of crime and addiction. And with fentanyl, it's immediate almost. I mean, a lot of people are dying with just one pill. Do you see the parallels with the cocaine, the rise of cocaine and Mexican drug cartels and fentanyl?
Yes, I do. And I think actually this fentanyl is even worse. And the reason why you do your diagram that John Sullivan, who I love, is a great guy, brilliant, commend him, is because we have India and China involved in it. Okay. And they're supplying the cartels, and the cartels, they're all into it for the plata. The plata is the money, yeah. And they don't care about anything. So I think they become much more sophisticated, Tanya, Martine, and Pat, than even during the 90s, because what the cartels have learned, Pat, is how to counterpunch the United States.
Yes.
They know how to they know our systems. They even know more about how to beat our system legally also. And so I think we're in a much more tenuous situation today than back in the 90s or the 80s, and even during the early 2000s. We're on track. I've been talking to my DEA friends, and I apologize to continue on with this, but I want to get this last part of it in. Talking to some of my DEA friends, I mean, we're looking at surpassing 110,000 poisonings of fentanyl potentially in this country. We're losing about 300 a day of people in this country.
I think that's crazy, and I want to get a comment from Tanya in a minute here, but I do have a comment. Isn't China's fentanyl kind of a karma for what was done with them with opium? And what they're really talking about is the Opium War. Britain forced China's market open back in the 1840s, 1850s, and compelled them to purchase opium from them, and they tried to stop that. So it's called the Opium Wars. And so there is karma. The problem with that, I think it's Monkey J. Boos is the guy who made that comment. It wasn't the United States who was involved in that opium trade. It was Britain, and it's the United States that is the target today. And I do think the Biden administration need to get on China and get on Mexico to shut it down. I think what Ralph is talking about in terms of countermeasure, there's this. It's called the game theory. People work very hard to overcome it. The game theory is you got two actors that are struggling to meet a goal. In our case, we are actors that abide by rules, and the cartels are actors who don't abide by any rules, and you're fighting with them and you're struggling. So every measure we put in place, they put a countermeasure in place because it's about the money, right? And China's in that game too. And so that's why I think we need to be more assertive with China. I think it's disgusting that they're doing this, and I think the CCP knows exactly what they're doing. But Tanya, I want to hit you up on the victim aspect of this, right? So a big chunk of the people dying of fentanyl, and the big chunk of the people who are addicted on cocaine were people who are under the age of 40, young people. These are people whose whole lives are either end suddenly or they're destroyed for decades because of addiction. And you're a mom, right? And so you tell me, from a mom's perspective, supporting the victims, this is disgusting what is going on regarding fentanyl and what went on with cocaine, right?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. This is a very scary time because with the open borders, not only do we have fentanyl coming across the border, but think about everything else that's coming through: the terrorists, the other drugs, the guns, everything else that this administration is allowing into our country. And what really adds to that is the social media. back in the day in the 80s, you had to go hit up somebody on the street to try to get dope, try to get, cocaine, what have you. Now you can do it from the comfort of your home, of your bedroom, and order up stuff. And what's even scarier is parents allowing their young children to have phones. They have access to the entire world, not just drugs, but pornography and all these other things that that go with that. But as a parent, it's very scary, and I honestly don't know how we can even control that. I see this just getting worse because, like I said, we're allowing the drugs to come in through the borders. Number one. Number two, we have an administration that doesn't care about its people. And number three, we have an administration that's owned by China. Sorry.
Yeah, and it's funny when I remember watching Trump. So I went to the Naval Postgraduate School for Homeland Defense and Security, right? So I got a chance to learn about the game theory and all that terrorism stuff. And I was deeply involved in the terrorism stuff for probably about 8 years. I had a security clearance. And so when I watching Trump do what he did, he did the basic security is like a bunch of layers. First, he hit up Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, and all, whoever he could influence, and said, "You need to stop the flow of the migrants," right? Then he hit up Mexico and says, "You need to get your act together." And he hit up China, and you saw some of the migration and some of the stuff slow down. And then when the Biden administration came in, they pretty much pulled all of that away, right? And so now all we're seeing is escalating of this. And I want to throw it in there, and then I'll move on to our next scene, but. The double whammy is not only it coming over the border, but the lack of aggressive enforcement by DAs like George Gascon, Larry Krasner, Gonzalez down in Austin, Kim Gardner up in St. Louis, who stepped down, but the damage is already done there. So when you start looking at these sort of DAs who are not filing many of these cases, because, okay, come on, you're the dope cop, Ralph, you make an arrest of somebody for a couple of dime bags, and what are you going to do? You're going to work your way up that chain of command, right?
Right. Hey, can I just dovetail off of something that Tanya said, please?
Sure.
I know you got a structure, but I just want to bring this up because, her being a mom, and, she mentioned some things there. The number one thing we could do to mitigate this is education. Education, the parents, the schools, the students themselves. And I'll just give you the statistic. It was 14 to 35 years old, right? It's now 10 years old.
Yeah.
10 years old to 35 years old, 188% increase. And I use this terminology, not me, but this is with DA, fentanyl poisonings of our children. 188%, Pat and Tanya and Martine, Chanel, everybody on this podcast. That's frightening. That is frightening.
I think so. Let me talk about the source DA a minute, and then we'll move on to our next scene. Is when you make those low-level arrests, it leads to the dealers, and then it leads to the suppliers. Since we're not making those low-level arrests, we're not prosecuting them. We don't have leverage to get intel to move up the chain of command. That's why the Soros DAs are wrong. You can blend focus on treatment and make that part of your criminal justice structure, but not making arrests and not prosecuting limits the ability of law enforcement to help solve the problem. And that's a fact.
Hey, so, Pat, I don't mean to interject something, but I'm sorry you got me on this podcast. I'm going to use my time. Something else we got to talk about, along with what you just stated, Pat, is people have to read the propositions. Prop 47 did exactly what you're talking about, Pat. It minimized drug charges. Basically, narco today they're not going from mid-level to high level. We're not getting those people on the street to build the cases up like we did years ago before Prop 47. Sorry, Pat.
And the people that were behind Prop 47 was Gavin Newsom, our governor, and George Gascon. They're the ones that.
Let's not forget Kamala Harris, who was the Attorney General, and she wrote that proposition is the Safe Streets and Safe Schools Act, and we can see the results of that since 2014. From 2016 to 2021, we had over a 1,200% increase in overdoses from fentanyl. Fentanyl, we only had a couple dozen overdoses in 2010. In 2021, I think it was over 1,200. So it was huge increase, and that rests on the hands of Kamala Harris, Gavin Newsom, and George Gascon. Hey, Martine, can we bring up the next one, leaving Juarez? And Now this scene, also they go to Juarez and they're going to get the brother Guillermo. I think he's the brother of the boss, the cartel leader, and they go there, and this is when Del Toro comes in here, and he's they bring him into the room after they capture this guy, and he's convinced to give them information. Now they're taking him back to the U.S. because they can't release him; he'll be killed, and he's probably got more information that they want to get. But the reason I wanted this scene is leaving Juarez is I really wanted to talk about as they leave. Well, when they go there, they see the hanging bodies that you were talking about, Ralph. They see the death and destruction that was going on down there at the time, and probably still it goes on. But as they're leaving, they know that they're likely to be hit. If anything's going to happen, they're likely to be hit at the border as they leave Mexico into the United States. And the interesting thing is they have Delta operators that are working with these guys, in addition to CIA and one FBI agent. So these are top-notch military assets that they're using to deal with what are essentially paramilitary assets for the cartels. And one of the reasons I wanted to get into this scene is as they're leaving, they spot the people who they're likely to take on. And I really wanted to get into this because clearly there are two different group cars full of guys. And these are low-level street thugs who are, in my opinion, gang members who are sent to probably do a distraction so that somebody can take out Guillermo, the lead guy, right? So, Ralph, can we talk about the intersection of street gangs with the cartels?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a great topic you bring up because, you know, the cartels have used all the things that we worked on, even in the federal investigation on Jerry. But all the way to El Salvador, when I worked in El Salvador, we had, listening on phones and, listening to messages and stuff like that. So, that's a true statement. And actually, they don't care about these street thugs. They use them. They say, okay, we'll give you so much money, and we need you to do this. And these guys, they're all hopped up on something, drug and stuff, and they go out and they're thinking they accomplish something for the cause, of intervening and trying to make a move up in the rank. And you put your work in. You put the work in.
So one of the things that I remember, and I'm not a gang guy and I'm not a narco guy, right? I just remember things. And so we had problems with 18th Street. We had problems with MS-13. We had problems, and we shipped a lot of those folks back home. And we did, by shipping them back home, they continued their criminal behavior, right? And they essentially became transnational criminal organizations. Would that be accurate, Ralph?
Yeah, in my first year, I went to El Salvador with the FBI. I got interviewed by at that time the president and the fiscal, the attorney general of El Salvador. How did he was sarcastic. He knew the answer, but he wanted to know what kind of man Ralph Ornelas is. Am I going to be straight up? And he asked me a question: how do I have this problem in my country? I go, well, MS started in Rampart District, LA. We deported all your El Salvadorian guerrillas, soldiers back, and they started Mata Salvatrucha, which started as punk rockers, but then it started MS. And then the other thing was 18th Street, which was really the gang victimizing the El Salvadorians, here in Los Angeles, which is ironic. So there's the evolution of the gang issues that the president and the fiscal at that time, they wanted to know if Ralph Ornelas was a straight up guy going to give him an answer, or if I was going to be a mentiroso, a liar to him, and I had to tell him the truth, and I know the FBI wasn't that happy about that, but hey, listen, I got to look in the mirror.
So, Tanya, you worked gangs for a while. Did you see the intersection of the drug trade with gangs when you worked the streets? You did more street work.
Yes, most definitely. I mean, the gangs and the drugs are synonymous. They go hand in hand. And to what Ralph was saying with the Mara Salvatrucha, yeah, they did start as because they were being harassed or victimized by 18th Street. But you know what? It did start here, but it has gone back to El Salvador, and they are thick as thieves down there, and they are an incredibly violent gang. They have no qualms about committing whatever crimes because they just don't care about going to prison because that just elevates them and it makes them, someone of value to the gang because they shot someone for the cause. And so most definitely here, there is an intersection between the two. And, we have incredible gang detectives with both LAPD and LA Sheriff's Department. And that's really the way we have to work together and to really try to control that whole narrative.
I think when we talk about cartels and the use of gangs to sell, you need to show that linkage. And so that's one more reason why our failure to use all of our tools, like we did under community-oriented policing, the broken windows theory, and the reforms have only opened up the market for selling of drugs where there's less risk for people. They're not going to jail. They're not going to prison. It's an easy source of income for the gangs. And they're only expanding their operations. Their thirst for money. We've had all these gangs running around doing robberies of people for their watches and their purses and you name it. So they're just getting more powerful with the money because we're not shutting them down with the dope. I mean, that's kind of how I see it. What do you think, Tanya?
Well, absolutely. They're being emboldened by these district attorneys who should be, enforcing the law, following the law that's already in place. And so these guys know that. And they're even, calling Gascon in LA, homie Gascon. And, really, when you're calling a DA homie Gascon, that should tell the public, what this really looks like. And this man really needs to be in charge of the public defender's office and not the district attorney's office. But you know what? The crime has gone up, and even in areas that you never saw this, like Beverly Hills. Who would have thought? These folks that live in Beverly Hills are afraid to even wear their nice jewelry or go out of their homes. And now these guys are actually going from LA, crossing into Beverly Hills, doing follow home robberies. And they just don't care. They really don't care because they know if they might get a slap on the wrist. That's about it.
I got a comment from somebody. I have a few friends who are cops and they're glad they are retired now. I think we can all probably say that, although, we get the itch to want to get back into the fight and help solve some of these problems because we have so much experience, which is why I bring you guys on, because you get at least a chance to talk about the truths. So, Ralph, I'm going to hit you up on one more truth and we'll go on to our next scene. So as crack cocaine flowed into Los Angeles, you started in 79. So as it started flowing into Los Angeles, we saw a change in a lot of our communities of color, our Black communities, with crack cocaine. I mean, certainly they had PCP and there was some heroin around, but crack cocaine, it changed everything. I mean, powder cocaine was expensive. It couldn't be afforded. It could not be afforded in the barrio or the Black neighborhoods. But as soon as you started rocking it up, you made it into an every person's drug because you get an intense high for a small amount of crack cocaine and a small amount of money, which really changed those communities. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Pat and Tanya, it was PCP, but then when crack cocaine off of Cook in Jarvis Street in the North End, which is now covered by Century Station, was at that time Carson Sheriff Station. I mean, there was like drive-by shootings all the time, rival gangs. Who's gonna distribute? The Bloods, the Crips, and my heart broke for the mothers that their 14-year-old boys were slinging this stuff for some other leader of the gang and stuff. And it was really violent, and it was really violent during that time. And I got to give credit once again, LAPD's crash unit was still in existence back then. LA County Sheriff's OSS teams, major crimes, narco. I mean, really trying to dig deep to try, to put a slowdown on the violence, because as a young patrol deputy, I mean, you talk about PTSDs, but, it never affected me because I was doing my job. I loved it. But I also, used to meet with some of the mothers there and talk to them, and to listen to a mother saying that she's putting her children in the bathtubs because drive-by shootings go rival gang because her son was, slinging dope and the rival gang wanted to take him out and stuff. I mean, I got to tell you, it was a very chaotic, violent time that we're trying to get control. And I believe we did a good job as a law enforcement agency I know there's things we could have done better, but I reflect back on my mentality and my perspective as a 24, 25-year-old deputy sheriff. We were chasing our tails from one murder to another, 245A2, assault with a deadly weapon, young man shot to the leg. I got to tell you, Tanya and Pat, it was, some of it was sad. I could say now as a 66-year-old man, reflecting back on it, it was sad to see mothers crying in the death. And who was making money? It was the Colombians. It was the leaders of black gangs that made big money. And, they didn't care about these young people. We
No.
did. We did. We were the San Michael, we were the people trying to hold back the devil and what they're doing to the children. So I don't know. Pat, you asked that question, I go on and on.
In 2013, I'm sorry, in 1993, we had 13.1 homicides per 100,000 in California. That was probably double that in the Los Angeles region. By 2014, we're down by 4.4 homicides per 100,000 in California, which means we over those years we saved probably tens of thousands of lives by reducing the crime. Now we're seeing it going up, and it's almost back to 7. I think last time I saw it was 6.8, and I think it was criming. So were our policies effective? Yes, they were. And this narrative where it was all based upon race and racism is wrong. We believed in what we were doing. We believed we were saving lives. Go ahead, Tanya.
But that around that time in the 90s, and I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that's when the third strike law came back. A lot of these laws that really reduced a lot of the crime that, really held people accountable for what they were doing. And now we're reverting back to not enforcing the law, taking away that, 3 strikes, the death penalty, all the enhancements and, special circumstances. So we're back to doing that. But moreover, we're now taking law enforcement and tying their hands behind their back, which we didn't have in the 90s. And so it's worse. Absolutely.
Hey, Pat, could I just say one thing? Tanya mentioned something. I just want to expand upon it. In 1986, they passed the Street Terrorism Act, 186.22, which really gave us the strength to the enhancements Tanya's talking about. Gascon's not implementing, on gangs and there's like 25 different categories. I can't remember them right now, all of them, but Pat and Tanya, you know what I'm talking about. That was a significant pass on 186.22.
And who passed that? Who pushed for that? Charlie Rangel, African-American leader in senator from New York, pushed for that. A lot of African-American leaders were pushing for this tough crime. They pushed that at the federal level. It was Bill Clinton who signed the 3 strikes law at the federal level. Democrats in California were pushing 3 strikes. And I think it was 93 or 94 it came in place, but that was a bipartisan effort. And this is where I have my problem. Back then, we were called racist for not doing something about drug law, this drug crime. Now we're called racist because we did something about it. And I'm saying we saved a hell of a lot more lives than died. And had we not done this, we would have destined a lot more people to death or prison or a life of addiction. So we did our job. Let's move on to the next scene. It's an important scene. It's called Migrants Intel, Martin. So in this scene, they've been to Juarez. They got some information that there's a tunnel. And that's where their main tunnel for this particular cartel. And, basically they want to do an insertion. So they got to find the hotel. They got to narrow down where this is at. And I really want to talk about, and they do that by, they're looking for groups of migrants who were captured during certain areas of the border to gather intel from them. And so they're interviewing the migrants. Del Toro is interviewing these migrants and trying to figure out, and it's interesting. The way the migrant talks about it, he goes, "Hey, this is an area of the border that it's a no-go. Only men and coyotes and whatever can go there. No women, no children go there. They limit a number of people go through this area because that's their main smuggling route, right? And they don't want it detected. They don't want the attention from the Border Patrol, which goes back to that conversation or that comment I said about the game theory. So they understand more migrants come across over here, it gets attention, they discover the tunnel, they don't want it discovered, right? And I thought that was very interesting because it shows, the movie shows, which is probably what's going on today, is they're using migrants to overwhelm Customs and Border Patrol so they can get their narcotics and other things that they make more money at, because they're making money off the migrants too, the human smuggling, but they also are using it in a way tactically, as Ralph, you talked about, tactically to gain advantage and move their other products over, which is fentanyl, cocaine, marijuana, and other things. And I will say this: if you believe that we're producing all of our marijuana here in these legalized marijuana, you're crazy. It's coming from the cartels. So, Ralph, talk about their tactical use of the border and immigrants to get their business done.
I got to tell you, whoever their advisor was, did a really good job, having dealt Benicio del Toro kind of vetting through all the people and, okay, get rid of group D. He said, let's keep D, A, D, and E or something like that. And he started talking more about them and he started picking them. And eventually, you remember, he had some of them in the hotel room where they, now that you could tell these, whatever the deal they made, they didn't talk about that in the movie, but they probably made a deal with these informants, having a map in the hotel room, and they're telling them where they think they're coming through. Remember the car? The car was an abandoned vehicle, was like kind of a signal place where that's where they come out of and stuff, So I like that. It showed, and probably Tanya could say the same thing, using detectives, using informants. I mean, they did a good job showing that, how they use these people. Whatever deal they made, they didn't, put that in the movie, but I thought that was pretty interesting, and I thought it was a good tactic. They had those people accessible right away before they started hitting the streets, so I thought it was good.
That's why I think a more aggressive. I look at the border wall. I went to Israel, and they built some walls to stop the intifada, the people coming over there blowing and killing up their citizens there. So walls do work, and Trump's wall, it just creates pinch points so you could better manage the flow of people across the border, because not everybody can get over the fence. So it naturally creates those pinch points. Certainly, they recognize that in Israel. I think that actually puts them up in Spain too, to limit the flow of migrants from Africa into their countries. So walls work, and the narrative that walls don't work was purely political. But I do think they use the migrants to overwhelm Customs and Border Patrol. Tanya, what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, we definitely need to have walls. We need to control the number or the flow of people that come in here, and President Trump was right. And, it's interesting because I remember going to Mexico and talking to a lot of the citizens there, and they did not like Trump. And so I would follow up with why? Well, because he doesn't want us to come to the United States. I said, wrong. He's never said that. He has said anybody can come to our country, but you need to be vetted. Once you're vetted and it's all good, you're not a criminal and you pass this, this process, then you're welcome into our country. But we also expect you to work and pay taxes. With these people coming over the border in droves, I don't know that we at some point are going to have the infrastructure to have all of these people here. And everybody comes here because they want money. Everybody thinks money grows on trees. It must. I'm sure the White House has a lot of trees in the back that, money trees, right? But you know what? It just doesn't make sense what's going on in this country. And I don't understand how people just don't see that. It's literally a freight train coming our direction, and it's going to crash, and it's going to be bad.
Well, I think that's where our media is not doing their job. They're misrepresenting what's actually going on. They're not reporting what's going on, and that's criminal almost at this point.
Pat. I have friends in Mexico and Central America still email me and tell me what is going on with your country. I mean, you couldn't come over here and stay here, and I mean, it's literally crazy. That we don't have a wall. We need it more so now than ever before. We got, 72 terrorists that came over, they defined. I mean, hey, listen, 9/11, I lost 13 friends in the Twin Towers. I grew up in Brooklyn with and went to high school with, played lacrosse with. That still stings me as an older man today. And why? Because we didn't do the right things to protect this country. Well, now we're going over the board, not protecting our country. Tanya lost a husband. So many people talk about other things. They lost family members. I mean, what are we doing not protecting the sovereignty of the United States of America?
And it's not just the
we got to go to break, guys. We'll pick up on the other side, okay?
Hi, guys. This is Gary from Pop Culture Minefield here on KGRA, and we're leaving for our first break. I hope we survive.
Did you know 75% of Americans are chronically dehydrated? If you struggle with focus, run low on energy, or when it's time to finally sleep, you simply can't, this can all be linked to dehydration, and Fuel Up has the answer. Our proprietary formula contains the finest cellular hydration with the strongest immune-enhancing natural ingredients. The Fuel Up system is made up of 3 different incredibly tasting varieties. Wake kickstarts your day with a jolt of caffeine. Play boosts focus while hydrating your cells. Rest not only helps you relax, but also rejuvenates your cells while you sleep. Here's what our clients have to say.
I really don't miss my coffee, and you can tell the difference.
So I'm going to take it for the energy. I'm going to take it for the play. I'm going to take it, all day.
And it works. That's the thing. It works. We love it.
Take the Fuel Up Challenge now, where we offer a Feel the Difference money-back guarantee. Fuel Up for life.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
Oh, wow, we survived. Welcome back to the commercial break. Now for some more Pop Culture Minefield on KGRA.
Okay, welcome back, folks, to Morning Coffee with the Chief. I'm your host, Patrick Jordan. I just want to remind you, folks, if you like the show, to subscribe to Pop Culture Minefield and like the video, and, of course, share it with a friend. If you're watching us Rumble, you follow us on Rumble. Of course, like the video and share it with a friend. I think we lost Ralph there. Hopefully, we can get him to...
Oh, no, he's sitting backstage. He's
sitting
quite
backstage.
busy.
Okay. Anyways, so Tanya, I got to pick up the pace here, but I wanted to talk about a key part of the movie and a key part of drug dealing, and that's money laundering. So they hit this guy, they hit the bank where he's laundering his money. They're causing him pain. That's what the movie's all about. But there are some folks who have blood on their hands and seem to avoid a lot of the scrutiny. And those people that are the ones that are laundering the money, right? And because you don't see them at the drug houses, you don't see them on the streets, but they are definitely making their part of their piece of the action, and it couldn't be done without that. What do you think?
I'm going to refer to Ralph actually on this one.
Hi, Ralph, what do you think? The guys that are laundering the money, they're as evil as the guys that are in the game on the street, don't you think? Is they know what the cause, what this stuff is causing?
Pat and Tanya and Martine is that those are the people trying to keep their hands clean, and they see no evil. They just think, okay, I'm making the plata, and I don't care. Even if that banker in the movie, he was culpable. He was culpable. He knows what's going on. When we would do certain narco investigations, or OSS, we did financials and stuff, and we'd love to get those people. Sometimes we were successful, and sometimes we were not. Most of the times we weren't, because we got walled off for some of those things. But those are the issues that really sometimes those are the people really need to go to jail too, and make an example of them, because they are contributing to the death of our community, youth in our community.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're one. I think the people who are engaged in narcotics use are partially responsible for the deaths in Mexico, and I think the people that are engaged in this money laundering are just as guilty as the guy that sells that fentanyl pill or the crack cocaine. Hey, let's go to the next scene. It's Wild Pony. Now, I had to use Wild Pony because that's the name of the bar, and so I always give Martine names to the clips.
Right.
Wild Pony Corruption, right? So she goes to the bar, which is not unusual. A bunch of guys do a raid or they're talking business, and they go to the bar afterwards. They have a drink, and she's a single lady, and the cartels know that she's involved because she went in the bank against instructions, right. And they're going to target her to get information out of her by using a good-looking guy. I forget the name of the actor's name in this one, but he was in the movie The Punisher, I think.
The TV show, John Bertel.
Bertel, yeah. I remember him from other movies, and
the accountant. He was in The Accountant too.
Oh yes, yeah, that's right. As the brother, yeah. I like him as an actor. I think he's really good, and but he's supposed to hit on her and try and get information from her as to what is going on. And he is a Phoenix police officer. And I think the important part of this is narcotics corrupts institutions, right? It corrupts people, but it corrupts institutions as well. And he's supposed to be a Phoenix police officer, I believe, and he's corrupted. And the question from Del Toro is how many people are corrupted? Give me your names and that kind of stuff. And he uses extrajudicial methods there to get him to speak, right? But this the other bad thing about narcotics is it does corrupt institutions, whether it's church, family, you name it. Tanya, what do you think about that?
Well, to comment about the movie, and I think that she went in there just wanting to be with her partner, but I think when her partner said, "Hey, this is my buddy, this is my friend," immediately she dropped her guard and didn't suspect anything, which is it could be a mistake, especially when you're in an op like that and dealing with other countries. But it's easy for me to sit here and say that, because I automatically, when somebody tells me they're a law enforcement officer, it doesn't matter where they're from, they immediately are my brother, and the conversation is easy and it flows. But it was just interesting, and lucky for her that he had that was it the rubber
the money band,
and that's what obviously got her suspicion. And I thought to myself, what if I was in her role? What if that happened to me? You kind of put yourself in that situation, and that was pretty scary, to have this guy on top of her. And he almost killed her, but I think what saved her life was that round that she went to shoot, and that's what alerted Benicio del Toro to go in there and take care of business.
I think they were probably watching her because they realized now she's the face of the investigation because she went into the bank.
Yes.
And so they decided to monitor because she's a hostage negotiation team person. She's not an intelligence person, and these guys are, and they know how these guys operate. But I think it does go show that cartels will corrupt organizations. I mean, the one I always remembered was the biker gangs had their ladies working the DMV to get information on you.
Yes.
I mean, that's one. But Ralph, they do have intel, and they are corrupting organizations. We saw a little bit on the sheriff's department with some folks, but we've seen it around the country as well. So drugs and narcotics and the money is corrupting. What do you think?
Well, I could go back to the time in the 70s. My Uncle Gabriel started with NYPD, and some of his friends were part of the Special Investigations Unit. He already left NYPD and joined LAPD in 1963, but some of his people his age in the 70s were part of SIU, and they got corrupted themselves. They corrupted, and the mafia corrupted them too. And it was all about showing the money, the silk suits, the Rolex watches, the Bruno Magli shoes, and guess what? That is the thing that, I pride myself, and also both of you and the other people listening who've been in law enforcement, who went through a 30 years plus career and kept your hand up, and you would abide by that oath. But my uncle's friends committed suicide, went to prison. But look at our agency in 88, 89. My classmate with the Arco Narco, a lot of guys I worked with, even one sergeant, who was the instigator and stuff. I worked for him one time as a patrol. I knew right away. I didn't trust that man, and I changed shifts, So we had it too. Every agency has it. And cartels and drug users, look at the weak Achilles heel of somebody in law enforcement. They know the background of people. Either it's, money, booze, Tanya, don't forgive me, women, they know something. I mean, I'm saying this because the men most of the time are the ones that screw up most of the time. Not saying women can't, but most of the guys are. And these are the things that, these guys do intel. These cartels do intel. The gangs do intel. And something, just like we're doing intel on them, they do it on certain people too.
Yeah, we worked some folks at West Hollywood when they went off the reservation and were ripping dope dealers off and people off their money, and you don't see it right next to you. You don't assume that people would do this because, as Tanya said, you kind of let down your guard, and they were also using. And I was an expert on recognizing the symptoms of, stimulants, and yet I didn't look at their eyes because I wasn't thinking that way. And just to clarify, I think all institutions get corrupted by narcotics and money, and you see it. Law enforcement can get corrupted, but we also, we do so much to vet our folks before they come on and to monitor our folks during their career to find this stuff out. And many times we deal with it, we find it and deal with it internally. And other institutions don't necessarily have the same level of checks and balances, and it gets a little tiring hearing we need more accountability for law enforcement. Heck, we got 15 LA City Council folks, right? Over the last 4 years, 4 of the offices have proven to be corrupt. So the same people that say we need more accountability for law enforcement need to. I think all politicians need to wear body cameras every time they're doing public business.
Yes,
so we can watch what they're doing, right? Body cameras have been beneficial for us because it shows that we're just doing our job. But put a body camera on a politician, and holy smokes, they can't make any money, right? So, but yeah, I think the corruption in institutions with narcotics is huge, and another reason why you need to stop the flow, right? But also, if you take it lightly, here's one of the things that I talk about. If we decide, it's not a big deal, that's kind of like prohibition. It kind of opens the door for corruption because we're saying, well, it's just narcotics. We don't take it serious, right? And that corruption can creep in. I also think that's you get on a slippery slope. It's either if it's illegal, it's illegal when you do it aggressively. If it's not, it's not, right? But right now, it's still illegal, even though it's in California, the sanctions have been dramatically reduced.
But Chief, just a quick comment. I know that most of these Hollywood movies love to show how corrupt law enforcement is, and people that know nothing about us believe that that's how we operate. And I always want to say this, and that's why I want to say this right now, is that, you know what? Yes, 99% of us are good, hardworking people. And there are some incredible checks and balances with our agencies. And if anybody is doing anything that is not above level, the departments will deal with that individual. I just want to make that clear because I'm not quite sure what type of an audience we have. But yes, no, we are not like that. We are people that want to go out there and really, enforce the law and fight for victims and be a blessing to society.
Tanya, thank you for saying that, because there are so many systems and units in place to keep checks and balances of potentially, if we do find out if there is an officer that is questionable ethics in doing misconduct, maybe criminal. I mean, I've been part of some of the investigations. Let me tell you something. We have some great people, but you're right. It's like a 1% maybe, not even, that's doing this. But the media and the TV, like this movies, think everybody's corrupt, and it's not true.
Right.
Well, I think the thing that most people need, we do hire from the human race, so it's
yes,
the possibility of corruption there, but most people don't understand the levels of the amount of work we do to keep our ranks clean of corruption. And I dare say many other professions would not be able to stand up to the level of review and oversight that we have. And I think one of the things that needs to be clear in criminal justice reform has been the big rallying cry for a lot of folks, but criminal justice reform for a lot of our politicians, they take the low-hanging fruit. What's the easiest thing to do? Well, we're gonna hold our police accountable, and we're gonna suggest that that's what we're doing for criminal justice. Well, there's only so much you can do before you actually reduce the effectiveness of law enforcement. We're already the most accountable profession, I think, societally, but politicians keep piling on because the challenges of reforming criminal justice mean, okay, well, that means you have to rebuild the institutions in the community. You need to rebuild the family. You need to make the schools better. Those are a lot harder things to do than just say, I'm going to hold the cops accountable. You get a press conference and some politician says that. Well, if the politician says, well, I'm going to fix the schools, well, they get to run up against a very powerful teachers union. If he says, I'm going to rebuild the family, well, what does that mean for folks? What does traditional family values mean? We need to rebuild the communities. Well, what does that mean for folks? What do you mean our community? So there's a lot of heavy lifting that actually needs to be done if you want to reform criminal justice, but they don't really want to do that. They just want to be able to plant a flag in their political plank to say that they did something by holding cops accountable versus trying to do some of the more challenging aspects of reforming criminal justice. So they're taking the low-hanging fruit that actually has been harvested way long time ago. What do you think of that, Ralph?
You just opened Pandora's box, brother. I mean,
yes.
I could think I could speak for an hour just on one of the things you just talked about. And you know what? It makes me laugh. You mentioned something, Pat. Body-worn cameras. Okay, I believe in them. But I want to see council member put a body-worn camera on them. I want to see a senator. I want to see a mayor. I want to see how they would have that on them. And law enforcement has historically, from movies from the 60s and the 70s, French Connection, and everything like that, we're easy to pick on. Why? Because we're a 24/7 operation to engage the public, to provide a service that when at 2 a.m, there's no other entity there to be there to help this child, this mother, this grandmother, the grandfather. I mean, we are it. We are it. And I got to tell you something. I think it's the greatest occupation. I would never change anything my whole life. I love it. I see you guys, you survived it. I'm sorry, Tanya, what happened to Steve. My heart breaks for you. But the thing about it, we had impact on people. And I'm not sure if I answered your question, Pat, but the thing about it is, this is the most honorable career you could ever have.
Thank you.
Read the book, War on Cops by Heather McDonald. Read it.
I already did. I already did, Ralph. I pull from that book to reinforce a lot of my opinions. Yes, and you did say something. Law enforcement is the most visible form of government that's out there. So anytime the public is upset about something, they're the first ones who take the hit. And I can say that from experience at West Hollywood. I mean, they were mad at the policies, the AIDS policy, the Reagan administration, yet they rallied in front of the sheriff's station for every single protest. And of course, we had nothing to do with that policy. I think one of the other things that bothers me, I appreciate that the government is now taking homelessness serious, but let's be clear. There were no social workers, or very few, available at 3 o'clock in the morning when some homeless person with mental illness decompensated. They called law enforcement. And I say that we were the social workers of last resort, because everybody with the master's degrees and PhDs didn't want to work at 3 o'clock in the morning. They wanted to work Monday through Friday, was weekend, the holiday off. And that is not when all of these folks, they don't conveniently break down and have their problems 9 to 5 Monday through Friday. It happens all the time. And that is what law enforcement has done. And we've been vilified for a very long time.
And usually when we end up being called to those types of calls, this person is not called. I don't care if you have a mental health specialist with you. They're not going to talk them down. We try that. We try talking them down. And unfortunately, a lot of them, and that was my experience, and I'm sure it was yours, they were having a psychotic episode. You're not going to talk a person out of that. You're just going to have to deal with what you have in hand. Or at hand. And then sometimes things can go sideways in a second. And we know that. And unfortunately, things sometimes can turn ugly. And we are left with no option, really. But it's just interesting how everybody wants to sit there in their office with a cup of coffee and Monday morning quarterback what law enforcement officers are doing. And what really, they only have a split second decision to make.
There were I can remember there were a handful of folks out there that were working late, social workers, but they were few and far between. It was really law enforcement, and sometimes the fire guys would come out and help you. But even I remember when they tried to switch dealing with mental health issues to the fire department, they wanted nothing to do with it. It stayed in the law enforcement realm. And I understand. Let's move on to the next operating in the U.S., because we really need to get into this subject. So what their goal was to bring the guy who was in charge in the U.S., Diaz, back to Mexico so that they would lead him to where the head guy was at. But I think it's important that we talk about operating in the U.S. The cartels are operating in the U.S. And I was on a radio show and I talked about the legalized marijuana. I said, most of that marijuana is coming from cartels, whether they're growing it across the border or they're growing it, there's data that shows that they might be growing it in our national forests. And the thing about it, when you talk to these legal marijuana advocates, is, hey, I'd say, you have no idea what they're using in terms of pesticide, you name it, that goes into this stuff. You have no idea. And that's why it's dangerous. And so when you legalized it without putting the proper regulations in place, because if you read the statute, there's all this regulation that was supposed to be in place, and the state has not followed through on that. And the cartels are filling that void, and they're putting legal operators, if you want to call them that, of marijuana grow out of business because they can't compete with these guys, right? Which is what it's all about. And fentanyl and methamphetamine, the methamphetamine, Ralph, the switch from bikers doing it in the desert when we started to control ephedrine down to Mexico, and then now they even switched to the type of stuff they use to P2P versus ephedrine, which makes it even more dangerous for us. They took over the methamphetamine trade for the most part. Yep. And now we're dealing with fentanyl, and the people coming through the border, I'm no doubt in my mind, a bunch of these immigrants coming over have the instructions to set up shop here to deal with this poison. What do you think, Ralph?
Well, can I just address one thing first, marijuana, real quick?
Sure.
And I'll gravitate to the fentanyl. First of all, the marijuana, in our national forest right here. When I was a captain narco, I've been on some of the eradication, and it was like a military operation with DEA and the Rangers, the park rangers, and our narco detectives who had military experience. Literally, I don't know how, Tanya and Pat, in the middle of the night, reels of PVC, pounds and pounds of pesticides, they got up in the middle of the night and put these people that the cartels pay in our national forest right here, Angeles National Forest, camping out, setting tents up, the irrigation stuff. When we would take it down, literally, it was like a military operation. We took thousands of plants out, PVC we took out. They had all these camouflage tents. This is happening right here in our national forest. I mean, people don't understand that the cartels are still doing it up and down California. And we legalized it, but guess what? The black market is still surviving and flourishing all the time. When we talked about, when I was a captain, we talked about seizures of money and that with legalization, we'll do away with that and we'll make more money. That's not true. The detriment of the high potency THC is affecting our young people, children, is having more admissions into hospitals for addiction and psychosis and schizophrenic episodes. Okay, so I'll leave it at that. Fentanyl is just going to be just like what they did, that you stated, Pat, with methamphetamine, these underground meth labs, which, just like in Breaking Bad, they did it in this country and New Mexico. They're huge ones down in Mexico. They have so much intel. They're communicating with people in the United States, bringing these coyotes up or people that paying to strap this stuff to them, or how the diversion that we make it one seizure, but meanwhile, around the corner, they're coming in another way. Just like about a week ago, Border Patrol just seized in Arizona 198 pounds of fentanyl. You know how that's enough fentanyl to kill 40 million people in the United States. 40 million people. And this stuff was, thank God for the officers of Border Patrol, however they did it tactically and intel they got. I mean, thank God for these people. But, it's never going to stop unless our administration and let's our law enforcement do the job. Do the job, build the walls. Because we have walls, we have protection to not let it tells these cartels we mean business. I mean, and it's only one fragment of it, but it means business, that we are not going to tolerate. Like I told you, my friends all the time tell me in social media, what are you guys doing? Are you guys smoking crack? I mean, literally, it's sad to hear friends of mine say this about my country that I love, but I can't argue with them.
So, Tanya, I got a question for you because Ralph said something here, and I want to ask your thoughts on it. About 6 months ago, I was reading an article up in San Francisco. They had a crew, a narcotics team that was taking down dealers of fentanyl in the Tenderloin district. and it was a sergeant, a Latino sergeant, and he was arresting all Latinos. And so the public defender, the head public defender, and the media did articles about how he's just targeting Latinos and it's racist. And finally, some news organization was kind of moderate up there. I don't know if they have them up in San Francisco, but they did. They publicized a statement. He says all the dealers up in the Tenderloin are from Honduras, Guatemala, and they're all Latinos. If I can't, those are the people who are selling fentanyl. That's who I have to arrest. And so I just wanted to hit on that divisiveness of the media and the opponents of doing effective law enforcement. They called the race card on a Latino sergeant because he was arresting primarily Latinos, who were the ones who were, and they're there likely because the cartel sent them up there. I mean, this divisiveness needs to end. What do you think, Tanya?
Obviously we know that we don't target Latinos, we don't target Blacks, we don't target any race. We go to where the crime has occurred and we arrest those people that committed the crime. If I'm Latina and they happen to be Latinos, that it just coincidence. But you know what? Law enforcement has been under attack for now, at least since the riots or the issues started in Oregon, probably about 3 years now. Law enforcement is under attack, and this is part of that attack in saying that we are racist. That seems to be the big buzzword now, that law enforcement is racist, and the media controls that narrative, and unfortunately, Soros is part of that ownership of that mainstream media. So that's the information that gets out there, and people don't bother to check the facts, and they just believe it because the media says that's the way it is. But let me make it very clear. We do not target any specific race. We go to where the problem is, and we identify through evidence who those people are, and we arrest them. We do not target any particular race. Like you said, most of the people that are committing the crimes are Latinos, just like where you go to the Black communities and, you arrest the people that are committing the crime. And if the community happens to be mainly of color, that's what you're going to arrest.
Well, I think up in San Francisco, it was specifically they were up there dealing for, a cartel. And that's why it was, and the interesting thing is, okay, they're selling the poison. Do we really? People are dying from this. I mean, in the homeless community up in LA, it used to be methamphetamine that was the number one killer. It's now switched over in the past year. Yeah, you guys heard my lead in. I'm on the board of the LA Mission, so I kind of stay in tune to what's going on in homelessness. Now it's fentanyl. Now it's fentanyl, and so it doesn't really matter the color of the person selling the poison. And there was an interesting article I read about Mexico itself, Ralph, and I'll let you comment on this after. So it was an article about addiction in Mexico. So I just gave you a little bit of history. We used to have a lot of amphetamine made in the United States, biker groups and whatnots. And then it switched over to Mexico because we clamped down a lot, right? Mm-hmm. Well, Mexico started making it and shipping it north, but their biggest addiction problem now is in Mexico is methamphetamine by far. And it has grown exponentially. And they, in their own publications, I've been studying Spanish, so I was able to pick up on this and then convert it to English to read it. And is methamphetamine. So they became the dealers and the purveyors of meth in the United States, but they have also became the dealers and purveyor of meth in their own country, and their own citizens are getting addicted and dying. And I just see that this path is coming for fentanyl too, because why wouldn't you just not make money off that poison at your home too?
I believe what your statement is correct. It's only evolution that they're going to go from methamphetamine to fentanyl. Plus, a lot of fentanyl is being laced into methamphetamine, cocaine, and heroin. Coming from Mexico. The brown heroin, the tar heroin. I mean, it's all being laced, and so I think you're right in your premise, Pat. And I think but the other thing is this, Pat. Working down in Mexico, they don't tell you all the true statistics. I'll tell you right now, like even the murder statistics when I was down there, I mean, their addiction, they don't tell you all the truth. They don't want to tell you the truth. So, it's just, that's just the way it is, So, I mean, who knows even we're telling all the truths of all the addiction, all the, the fentanyl poisoning too.
And this came from their health ministry. the numbers that I saw. And I will say, National Institution of Health will reinforce what Ralph says, that cocaine and methamphetamine are being laced with fentanyl, and that is killing long-term users of both because they don't know what they're getting. And hey, Martine, can you bring up that map that shows the penetration of the cartels into the United States?
Sure thing. Here it is.
So if you look at this, I took this off an Intel brief, and it was actually from 2015, which is consistent when the movie was released, and it shows the different areas, the infiltration of different cartels throughout the United States. And obviously, you can't remember all the colors, but Sinaloa is a big one here. You got the Gulf Cartel and other people that still existed. So it shows it's fairly robust and throughout the entire United States. You can go ahead and take that down, Martine, now. And so, Ralph, they are here and they are active. That's probably only grown since 2015. You're not surprised by the map, are you?
No. Actually, I thank you for the map. But some of the information I received, they're in 60-something cities in the United States and expanding even more. They're strategic. They know exactly what they're doing, and they're using transnational gangs, MS-13. You know, in the United States they say MS-13, and when you're in El Salvador, Honduras, or Guatemala, you say MASA, just MS. Okay, and they're in every farmland, ranch land. These gangs, because they're good workers, they establish themselves, and they're great at extortion, and that's what they're doing a lot throughout our United States. So the cartels already have the soldados, the soldiers around the United States to be able to use, just like on the East Coast, the cartels are using the Puerto Ricanos, the Dominicanos, you know, and also the Central Americans all up and down the East Coast, you know. So they got the framework. If you ever want to read a great book, it's called The Black Hand. It was by Chris Blanchford, who interviewed Rene Boxing Enriquez, who was Artesia gang member, who became a high-level Mexican mafia member. And when we did Jerry Ortiz's, investigation, we brought him down from Pelican Bay, and we used him to help us. And he laid out everything about how they function. And so it was a great, conversation about intelligence. And what we're talking about here is that, they're strategic, just like back in the Italian mafia days. They know they had a framework how to market their product.
So just to clarify for our audience, Jerry Ortiz was a decorated deputy sheriff who was murdered by a gang member. I forget what town. It was Wine Gardens, right?
Yes.
And the guy was a notorious gang member, that's what Ralph's talking about. They wanted to take the whole crew down, the whole gang down, and so they put a task force together to deal with it. You can look up who Jerry was online. I'm sure you get the story, but that's what he talked about. So let's go to the next scene, Martine, hitting the tunnel. And this is right so they now they know where they've got their intel from the immigrants. They got their Diaz, the guy that's operating in the U.S. is scared. He's lost a bunch of money. His operation's getting impacted, and he's getting called back to Mexico, either to get punished, but probably to strategize how do we overcome this, right? For them, this is business. They know that the U.S. is going to do something, and they probably weren't ready for the breadth of action by the U.S., and it doesn't fit with the strategies that they normally see from the U.S., from the United States, in terms of response to these things. So they're hitting a tunnel and they're using these operators, but it's just a kind of a distraction and an assertion of Del Toro into Mexico. But Ralph, I want to talk about tunnels, the use of tunnels to bring drugs in. And were you ever involved or in any investigations where it led to knowledge and understanding that tunnels were being used to bring stuff in?
I was down on a task force down in San Diego with the FBI in 2005. I never got a chance to go down into the tunnel, but there was an expert San Diego police officer. I can't remember his name. Just a great person, and he got all the informants. And they're right. They would come right over into San Diego into a warehouse, We saw pictures when we had this conference at the federal building in San Diego, and they showed pictures. They're coming right into, from the Mexican border into San Diego, and these warehouses and businesses, and some of the people, going back to what you said about laundering, the people that owned these warehouses, the money was given to them too, and they turned a blind eye. And that's where the RICO Act comes in from. Racketeering, influence, corruption organizations they use to be able to, get those people who are hands off but actually have hands on. So yeah, I see some of it, but not down the tunnel itself. But I did communicate with some of the people down in San Diego, who were the experts from the feds and the San Diego PD.
Well, I think that some of the data that I've heard, or some of the stories I heard about tunnels, is they're actually the longer they've been around, they're actually pretty nice. They got lighting, they got air being pumped in, and they are long, and they'll go from one structure in Mexico under the border and to another structure into Mexico. And the thing about a tunnel is, one, it indicates you have to have a lot of resources to build a piece of infrastructure like that, right? So the money has to be worth it. And two, the barriers have to be in place to prevent you from making easy. So I go back to the wall thing, because when I was in Israel, one of the things we got briefed upon, so I was running around with their some retired IDF guys, and they were giving us some briefings on some of the events that happened in Israel, and they have this huge wall in Gaza, so it keeps Hamas away from Israel. And we went to that, and they told us their biggest challenge is tunneling and how they overcome that tunneling. But some of the guys had successfully tunneled in to Israel and ended up killing a bunch of people. So for them, it's real. It's about lives, right? They want to get over and kill Israelis. So they used to say 13th century solution for a 21st century. That's how they would criticize Trump and his wall. But they're using 13th century tactics, tunneling under a wall. When they were storming a castle, they called them sappers. They would tunnel underneath the wall to blow up the wall. So the fact that they have the infrastructure in place to do this, the motivation to do it because the big money's involved there, indicates, one, just how sophisticated they are and how motivated they are. Do you kind of agree with that?
Absolutely. There's no budget. We have to worry about a federal agency. There's got to be accountability about the monies that the federal FBI is using, DA. LA County sheriffs were always, as a captain narco, I had to justify certain money. Let's see, asset forfeiture. We're going to use monies on investigations and stuff. We're going to justify it. They don't have to justify anything. They know the billions of dollars are coming their way. So, and guess what? They have the populace of people that will do it for a little bit amount of money, and the creativity and the ingenuity, be able to do that stuff.
Well, obviously, go ahead, Tanya.
And obviously, in Mexico, people don't make money at all, and they want to feed their families, so they're willing to take risk and do whatever they can to make some money. And these cartels just have an unlimited budget, and so a lot of people end up doing that. But here we're talking about the tunnels that we know about. How many more are there? Right?
Absolutely.
They're pretty sophisticated. They're one way or the other. They're determined. They're getting their whatever they need across the border.
Well, it goes back to that old game theory, because we also had the Ponga boats. So am I saying that word right? Where the boats were Ponga, and they'd go way out to sea in these little skiffs almost, loaded down with cocaine or whatever, and then land 50 miles north or 100 miles north on the California coast, which tells me, it tells me when they have to do things like that, some of your strategies are working, right? Because if they have to take extraordinary measures, tunnel or use Ponga boats, that means a lot of your strategies are working. And of course, then you just have to adapt and overcome their changes. One of my gigs was I was in a jail, as Ralph remembers, and they put me in charge of South, and smuggling was a problem. And I implemented the game theory strategy, and we ended up shutting down the narcotics coming there, and it just created a bunch of disruption. They sent some hitters down to beat up the guys who were in charge of drugs, because the Mexican mafia wasn't making any money. So you can effectively, but you have to be on your game, and you have to use all your tools. And ideologically, and this is where Tanya's talking about, ideologically, if you don't believe in using those tools because it doesn't fit your political motives, doesn't fit what you want, then you're going to fail, right? If ideologically you believe, well, we're just going to let everybody in, then and you're taking these security tools away, we're only going to let you use certain. You're destined to fail. Do you kind of agree with that, Tanya?
I'm sorry. I'm going to give that to
That's Ralph.
No, I agree with you, Pat. It's like boxing, and all you're doing is throwing a left jab. You can't use your right hand, and so you're handicapped in how to counter the activity out there in the street. And you mentioned the ponga boats. I got to just mention this. When I was a captain of Narco, we had intel, and we paid big money in an informant that on the west side of Avalon, we got submarines that we interdiction. And we used the SWAT team and stuff. And, so I mean, it's right here. People didn't even know about it. We did it, and we didn't brag about it. But, guess what? It was some great operations that not me, but the detectives did. And using informants, and we had to use monies to be able to extract that information to be able to be successful on an investigation like that.
So, just clarify. So the ponga boats were hitting Catalina Island. Was that?
Yeah, on the west side of Catalina Island, it was actually submarines, not just ponga boats.
So it's just to clarify. So those folks who are not familiar with California, there's a series of islands off the coast called oh my God,
San Clemente Islands and you got Avalon.
Yeah, I sail to them twice a month, and I'm losing that. But anyways, Catalina Island is one of them. It's got a town. It's policed by the sheriff's department. So Ralph is talking about kind of the wilderness side of the island, the backside, and they're hitting with ponga boats, which means then they have to come on the island and then smuggle it across on ferries to the. And it's they probably saw it as a softer target than hitting the regular coast, which is why they did it. So Tanya, let me reframe that question to you. When you handcuff law enforcement and limit their tools, you have to expect that they're going to be less effective. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. But here's the thing, and this has been going on. It's almost like a chess game. We figure out what they do, we stop them, and then they counter us, or what's the word I'm trying to use? When you're in war, right? You're trying to flank the opposition. Yes. And so it's this back and forth. And if they can figure out what it is that we're doing to stop them, they're going to try something different. And then we figure out what they're doing, and then we're going to try something different. So it's this back and forth, this, reverse intelligence. Because just like, Ralph was saying, we have people that work intelligence. I get informants, I get information. They're doing the exact same thing. Yeah, but we have to play by the rules. They don't have to.
You can see it every day in the Ukrainian war right now. I mean, it's an interesting thing. If you think of the game theory, they're actually in war, right? So they have all of these air defense systems in place on both sides, and so their way to overcome it is to send multiple missiles, knowing that maybe a certain percentage will be shot down and a certain percentage will get through. That's classic. That's classic game theory, but that's also what's going on the border. They know that they're going to lose a certain amount, but a certain amount is going to get through. Mm-hmm. And so that's what they're doing, and that's why they're doing it. And so the more security strategies you have in place, the more you're going to capture, the more it starts to hurt. And that's when people get called back to Mexico to find out what's going on and what we have in this scene. Let's go into the next scene, Medellin, because I really want to get into. They called the bad guy, so he's been inserted. He's gone through the tunnel. They did their diversion thing. The FBI agent goes and she sees that this was really about just an insertion thing, and of course she's not happy with any of this. She doesn't want to be part of this. But they insert their SICARIO, the hitman, who's going to go after, who's going to pay this guy back for the stuff that he's doing in the United States. But they brought up the word Medellin, and they called him Medellin, and they said that the idea is the U.S. would love to go back to where there was just a handful of people operating and not this dispersed violence that's going on. First of all, I don't think policies really want any drug dealing going on in the United States, but I mean, if it's going to happen, they certainly want the violence to go down. But he calls the guy, and this is he gets across, and he's got this corrupt police officer on the Mexican side, and he calls him Medellin. And my assumption is is they know he's from Cartagena, Colombia. They know that he is connected with the criminal gangs down there, the transnational criminal organizations down there from Colombia, and they know who he is. That's number one. But it brings back a time when we only had really a couple of big cartels who were primarily responsible for shipping the cocaine here. Ralph, you want to talk a little bit about the Colombia times and it's changed to where Mexico has been the primary smugglers?
Yeah, it's really interesting, the evolution that the Mexican cartels in the 80s and stuff said, had enough of this shit, excuse my expression, hell with the Colombians, we're gonna run this because they're gonna need our plazas to get everything up. So Colombia, especially after the United States and the new president of Colombia, they took down Pablo Escobar. So now you got the cartels saying, it's our opportunity now. We're the new boys on the block. We're going to take control of this. And they used it in the movie Medellin because at that time, Medellin controlled all the drugs. So I think that the premise in the movie, when Silvio, the police officer from Sonora, I think it was, he called him Medellin, because the control. He knew who he was a hitman, but Medellin because he came from Cartagena, and he's using the term Medellin as a control, and he's an assassin. So, it's very interesting. I tell you, Benicio del Toro scares the hell out of me with his eyes and stuff when he was an actor. But I got to tell you, the Mexican cartels have now, they're the new Medellin. They're the new Medellin in regarding to controlling all narcotics that come from the South into Central America, the United States, from China, India, and it's truly, it's truly frightening because where's it going to go? And your map before, Pat, it frightens me as a man, and that I don't have grandchildren yet. What's going to happen in the United States of America if our politicians who are weak continue to take away the certain things that we implemented to be able to intervene and hold some semblance of order in our country? Are we going to become a new, I hate to say this, Mexico or Colombia of the 90s or Mexico of the 2000s and presently, because they've inserted that map. They've inserted themselves all over the place. And I don't know if we have if they keep on taking away, I don't mean to go on a diatribe about this, but I really believe in this, is that if we take away all the powers that we have as local agencies, state and federal, I got to tell you, we're going to be in a problem.
Unfortunately, it'll be the pendulum that swings back, which is where the work of Tanya comes in place, where they, I almost called you my granddaughter's name, Tania. So Tanya comes back in place, where we talk about the victims. But, Tanya, you're from El Salvador originally. Is that correct?
Yes.
And we're seeing that the Mexican cartels are also taking a great deal of control in Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. Correct. I mean, I don't know if you have still relatives down there to talk to, but that it's going on down there as well, or they're corrupting those institutions even more than they were corrupted before. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Even for me, going back to my country, it scares me. I have a half sister there, and I have to make sure she, has people to watch our backs. At the last time I went to El Salvador, her boyfriend was a soldado in the military, and we literally did not go anywhere without him with us. And it was funny because anytime we'd go someplace, we caught each other, the soldado and myself, standing against the wall and looking around the crowd, kind of the same tactics that, the police work, to kind of watch your back and look around before you step out. You want to know what everything around you looks like, right? That head on a swivel. But absolutely, it's extremely dangerous, and it's just getting worse and worse. And for me, as a native of El Salvador, going there now, people call me American. They can totally tell that even though I speak the language, I still have the same, everything's the same in terms of the language, because the and I'm trying to think, what is it? the language is a little bit different than any other, like, Mexico or other countries. What is it that
the accents
the accent
accent is very different.
Acento.
Right. And so, but because I've kind of lost that, immediately I'm identified as an American. And that is scary to me.
Pat, could I just dovetail off of what something Tanya said?
Go ahead.
Right now, just think about this. You talk about corruption in El Salvador. The president that I met at the time, Antonio Gonzalez Saca, is in prison. Why? He took money. Mauricio Funes was voted in, the first communist president ever voted in El Salvador in 2009, left El Salvador, is now in Nicaragua. Why? Because Alberto Ortega is comunista, and he's communist. So he's there, but they prosecute him for being corruption. But they'll never get him because he's going to live his rest of his life in Nicaragua. So now we got Bukali, and a lot of people in El Salvador like him because he's using the mano dura. The mano dura is a strong hand where they're putting everybody in prison for tattoos, anything, walking on the wrong side of the street. And you probably saw the pictures of everybody squatting down with all their underwear on and tattoos. Well, people like it down there, I hear, because there's some semblance of order. And this is the lowest level of murders they've ever in a long time, because the mano dura, the laws that are put in place down there. So it's
I'm sorry, Ralph, what was that country again?
El Salvador.
El Salvador, yeah. That was probably one of the more conservative of all those countries. Yeah, go ahead, Tanya.
And here we have rights. If we're going to, as law enforcement, if we're going to stop a vehicle, we have to have probable cause, right? Down there, it's scary. If you see an officer could be standing on the street and they're all carrying their rifles or AKs. And if they look at you and they point at your vehicle and they motion for you to pull over, you better pull over. I mean, they could open fire on you. There is no, or they grab you, take you to jail, and you disappear. And that's very real in El Salvador. That's it. Yeah. It's scary. People don't know. Go ahead.
That's why I wanted to do this movie. I'm going to do No Country for Old Men in a couple of weeks. I'm going to have John Sullivan on and Matt Rodriguez, and we'll get into these subjects again. But it's important for our listeners and our viewers to understand, how we see it and what we lived when we worked for the last 40 years and where we see it's going because of that. And, I did want to talk about Silvio a little bit, and we'll move on to our last two scenes. But I looked like he was crying. I thought I saw a tear run. He knows what's going to happen to him. He's a family guy. They show that, but he is corrupt, which is not unusual in Mexico. And he knows that the Sicario is going to kill him. He knows it's coming. Mm-hmm. And I think I saw a tear running down the side. Either he was sweating or it was a tear. I thought it was a tear. Because he knew he wasn't going to see his son again, and that's part of the game. That is part of the game, and so I just thought that was interesting. Let's go on to Diaz. So Victorio has crossed the border. He's now in Silvio's car, and they're using electronic surveillance on Diaz to pinpoint where he's at, so that Silvio can pull him over for Victorio, and because Diaz is going to take him to the big boss. And I think once Diaz gets shot, he knows what the game is. So he ends up killing Silvio, right? And he ends up in the car with Diaz, who's the American boss, so we'll call him the American jefe, but he's going to the big guy, and he's been shot in the leg, and now he's driving. And it's interesting, as he's driving up to the boss's place, he's saying, "What are you going to do to me? What are you going to do to me?" First of all, these guys had no qualms of killing all kinds of people. I mean, 42 people in that house, Ralph. They had no qualms about killing anybody, and yet they're worried about themselves. And I think the higher you go, that preservation thing, they don't think they're going to be touched because they're so high up. But this Sicario, this Delatorio, he ain't having any of that. These guys are going to pay the price, and both of these guys were sweating it, and both of them knew what was coming. What do you think, Ralph?
Oh yeah, I mean, they know the game. I mean, when you live by the sword, you die by the sword. I mean, and so they know their term of life is pretty short, especially being a jefe, and the jefe of the United States, as soon as he saw, the Silvio gets shot, he knew what's going to happen to him. He knew it. I mean,
yeah.
There's no ifs, ands. It's like the movie Casino or Goodfellas when Joe Pesci walked into that room and there was nobody there, and they pop him in the head. You know, I mean, so that's what happens.
And that's part of the life. And so he takes him to the big boss's house, which is basically a mansion, and they're eating dinner outside. You know, the whole California living, right? But in Mexico. And he's with his family. The big boss is with his family, and I think it's unrealistic that our hitman takes out so many bad guys on security. Either they're really inept, or he's just really good. It's just the movie. One guy takes all these guys out, and of course he ends up killing Diaz, which we all knew was going to happen, right? And then he pins down the family, and this is where the revenge comes. And I think this is, some people might cheer for Vittorio in this, the Sicario in this, because he's, the ends justify the mean. This guy's killing everybody. He ends up killing this guy's entire family in front of him before he kills them. But that is also part of this, Tanya. So families being killed, families who are part of this, they may not even be part of the corruption, but because they're married to who they are, whether it's, I think they had one up north a couple months ago where a woman and her kid were killed, and they felt it was cartels that did it. Families are in play, right? They're targets.
Yeah. I mean,
Patricio had a score to settle. His family was taken out in a brutal way, and so yes, the family that they're part of the whole deal, and it doesn't matter. They don't care. And
okay, well, I want to wrap up here first, but I did want to talk about the final scene, and this is where Del Toro shows up at Emily Blunt's.
We have only 2 minutes to do this.
And he threatens to kill her if she doesn't sign off that everything was done legitimately. Now, that is obviously that didn't happen. I'm sure she would have been given a nice position somewhere, and with a lot of money, they would have just bribed her, the FBI, that is, to do what they wanted to do. But guys, I hope you had a good time on the show, and we got into some really good subjects with this show, and I want to encourage you to stick around. Let me do my wrap up here real quick, though. You can find Tanya are you still hosting iDetective occasionally, Tanya?
Yes, I am.
So iDetective is on KGR Radio, and they run on Rumble. They are at 3:00 Pacific Standard Time every Wednesday, so you can catch that tomorrow. There's another show on KGR Radio. It's called Search Warrant. It runs at 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. on KGR Radio and Rumble. Both shows are by cops, for cops. It's great stuff. I want to encourage you guys to tune in next week. The next show we're going to do is White Boy Rick, and I'm going to have a couple of retired coppers from Detroit who can talk about the corruption in the city of Detroit and that movie. It will be a great show. And Martin, are we ready to go?
I would say so.
All right, thank you.
So, Chanel?
Those sons of bitches. Ma, I'm doing a show.